In the grand and shining halls of the Seraith Empire, the name of Princess Kayleigh was whispered with a mix of reverence and fear. She was known across the galaxy as a being of beauty and strength, but there was something more, something that made her a figure of both awe and terror. Her presence, though captivating, came with a strange and terrifying reputation. She was cursed, or so the stories said, a curse that broke the minds and hearts of men. Kayleigh had never known love as others did. Every time she grew close to a man, something strange would happen. Men who tried to court her would begin to show signs of madness. Their minds would crack, their emotions would turn unstable, and their strength would fade away. Some believed it was her touch, others thought it was her gaze, but the truth was far more tragic. It wasn't a curse she had chosen, but one that had been thrust upon her by the cruel hand of fate. From a young age, Kayleigh had been aware of the power that swirled around her. She could feel the energy in the air, the way men's eyes would linger on her, as if she were an object of desire. But every time one of them got too close, the same thing would happen. They would change. She remembered the first time it occurred. She was just a child, unaware of the consequences of her actions. A young prince, handsome and kind, had smiled at her and offered her a token of his affection, a simple necklace. She had accepted it, not knowing what it would cost him. The prince had not been the same after that. He grew distant, his eyes clouded with confusion. His strength faded, and his once proud heart turned hollow. The memory of his bright smile haunted her for years as she realized that she was the cause of his downfall. No one could explain it. No one knew why it happened, but it became clear that Kayleigh was dangerous, and not just to men, dangerous to herself as well. She was a woman who could never love without causing destruction, and so Kayleigh had locked her heart away. She kept her distance from others, especially men. She ruled with grace and authority, yet she remained isolated from the very thing she yearned for most, connection. She had witnessed the effects of her curse time and time again, and it had shattered her hope for a normal life. Love was something she could never experience, not without causing pain and devastation in the lives of those around her. But everything changed when the human captain, Elliot Vance, arrived in the capital of the Seraith Empire. It was a day like any other, yet the arrival of the human delegation stirred the air with excitement and tension. Earth, a young member of the Galactic Council, had sent its representatives to negotiate trade agreements with the Seraith Empire. The humans, though still new to the intergalactic scene, were ambitious and eager to make their mark. Captain Vance was no ordinary man. He was a decorated hero of Earth's fleet, known for his bravery and his keen sense of diplomacy. When the human fleet arrived in the Empire's capital, they were met with grandeur and ceremony. But Vance was not a man to be easily impressed by the alien opulence that surrounded him. His eyes, dark and intense, scanned the room, taking in the foreign sights and sounds with a sharp focus. Unlike the other diplomats who were eager to please the Seraith royalty, Vance had no interest in ingratiating himself with the Empire's ruling class. He had a mission to complete, and he would do so with or without the approval of those around him. But when his gaze met that of Princess Kayleigh, something stirred deep within him. Kayleigh stood in the center of the grand hall, her regal presence drawing the eyes of every noble and dignitary present. She wore the traditional robes of the Seraith royal family, the fabric shimmering like starlight, reflecting the soft glow of the palace's many lanterns. Her beauty was undeniable, and yet there was an almost tragic aura about her, an untouchable sadness that seemed to hang in the air around her. Vance noticed it immediately, the way the room seemed to bend around her, how the people stood a little straighter in her presence, as if she were a force of nature. But it was her eyes that held his attention. They were a deep, stormy gray, filled with the weight of something unspoken, something hidden. For a moment their gazes locked, and Kayleigh felt the pull. She had seen many men look at her that way, with a mix of longing and fear, but this was different. This human, this Captain Vance, did not look at her with awe or fear. He looked at her as if she were just another person, another individual to be treated with respect. There was no hesitation in his gaze, no lingering glances that made her feel like an object. There was only curiosity. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, and it both intrigued and confused her. How could he be so unaffected by her? How could he be immune to the very thing that had broken every man before him? Their first conversation was brief, a formal exchange of pleasantries during the opening banquet of the human delegation. Kaylee's had no choice but to participate, her position as princess demanding her presence. Vance was polite but reserved, keeping his distance. He was here for business, not for games, and Kaylee's could sense that. She noticed how he seemed unaffected by her presence, as if the curse that had torn apart so many men meant nothing to him. It was a strange, unsettling feeling. Over the next few days, their paths crossed more than once. They spoke in quiet corners, exchanging words about the negotiations, but there was something more in their conversations. Something Kaylee's could not ignore. Vance was different. He was not intimidated by her, not swayed by the stories of her curse. He treated her as if she were just another diplomat, another person to be understood. At first, Kaylee's was guarded. She knew what happened to men who got too close to her. They would fall just as the others had before him. She could not allow that to happen. She could not risk destroying this man, this human who seemed so strong, so determined. But as the days passed, Kaylee's found herself intrigued by him. His calm, steady demeanor in the face of her presence was unlike anything she had ever encountered. There was no hesitation, no sign of weakness in him. If anything, he seemed more focused than ever, as if he were determined to see the mission through, regardless of the challenges that stood in his way. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kaylee's found herself standing alone on the balcony of the palace. The city sprawled beneath her, a sea of lights and shadows. The night air was cool, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax, to breathe freely without the weight of the empire pressing down on her. She had thought she was alone. But as she turned, she saw him, Captain Vance, standing at the edge of the balcony, his dark eyes fixed on the skyline. He hadn't heard her approach, but when she spoke, he turned, his expression unreadable. "I didn't expect to find you here," she said softly, her voice carrying on the night breeze. Vance regarded her silently for a moment before speaking. "I could say the same for you, Princess, but I find it peaceful out here." Kaylee smiled faintly, though there was sadness in her eyes. "You wouldn't say that if you knew what it felt like to live in this place." Vance stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You don't have to live in it alone." The words hung in the air between them, and for a brief moment, Kaylee's wondered if he understood. Could he truly understand the burden she carried? The curse that made love impossible? Was he brave enough to face it? Or was he just another man who would eventually crumble under the weight of her power? But as she looked at him, something inside her stirred, a feeling she had long buried, a small spark of hope. Perhaps Vance could be different. Perhaps he was the one man who could withstand the curse, who could break through the walls she had built around her heart. But even as that thought formed in her mind, doubt crept in. She couldn't afford to care. She couldn't afford to risk everything for the chance of something she had never known. And yet, the pull between them was undeniable. The curse that had haunted her for so long seemed to fade in the light of his calm presence. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Days passed, and Kaylee's found herself increasingly drawn to Captain Vance. What began as curiosity soon turned into something deeper, something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For years, she had buried her emotions, hidden behind the walls of her royal duties and the weight of her curse. But Vance was different. He treated her as a person, not as a legend, not as a monster. He saw beyond the stories, beyond the myth that followed her wherever she went. He saw her as Kaylee's. Yet, as the days grew longer, so did the conflict within her. She had spent her entire life building walls to keep herself from getting too close to anyone, especially men. She had watched too many crumble, too many broken by her presence, by the curse that had followed her since her earliest memories. There was a part of her that wanted to let Vance in, to let him see the real her, but the fear of what would happen if he did kept her at arm's length. Every time she found herself near him, her heart raced in a way it never had before. She could feel the pull between them, an attraction she had not experienced in years. But it terrified her. She had seen what happened to those who dared to love her. She couldn't bear to be the cause of another's destruction. She couldn't be the reason someone she cared about lost themselves. Kaylee's had never talked about her curse to anyone. She had always kept it hidden, even from those closest to her. But as her time with Vance continued, she felt the weight of her silence pressing on her. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that her curse was nothing more than a ghost story. She needed to explain it to him, to make him understand the danger he was walking into. One evening, as the sun began to set and the golden light bathed the palace in warmth, Kaylee's found herself alone in her chambers. She gazed out the window at the sprawling city below, her mind racing with thoughts of Vance. He had been so kind, so patient, and yet he was getting closer to her with every passing moment. She had no idea how long she could keep pushing him away. No one had ever gotten this close, not since her childhood when the curse first reared its ugly head. Her hands trembled as she traced the delicate patterns on the edge of her window sill. She had to tell him. She had to warn him before it was too late. But could she find the strength to do so? Could she bear the thought of him walking away from her, of him seeing her as the broken, cursed creature she had become? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and she quickly wiped her hands on her dress. "Enter," she called, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. The door opened slowly, and there stood Captain Vance, his dark eyes searching hers. "Princess," he said, his voice calm and steady, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Kaylee's felt her heart skip a beat. She had not expected him to come to her chambers. "Of course," she replied, her voice soft. Vance stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He seemed to hesitate for a moment before speaking again. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night," he began, his gaze never leaving hers. "About the curse, about the pain you carry." Kaylee's froze. She hadn't expected him to bring it up so soon. She had tried to keep her distance, but it seemed that Vance wasn't going to let her hide any longer. "I don't know what it is that makes you think you're cursed," he continued, his voice gentle but firm. "But I can see the weight you carry. And I can see that it's keeping you from living your life, from being who you truly are." Kaylee swallowed hard, her throat dry. She wanted to say something to explain it all, but the words caught in her chest. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes locked on his. He was right. She had spent her whole life pretending, hiding from the truth, but with him she felt the walls crumbling little by little. "I'm not like the others, Princess," Vance said, taking a step closer. "I don't fear you. I don't fear whatever it is that makes you feel this way. I want to understand you. I want to know the real you." The sincerity in his voice broke through her defenses. She had never heard anyone speak to her this way before. It was as if he could see right through the walls she had spent years building. He wasn't afraid of her. And for the first time in her life, Kaylee's felt like maybe, just maybe, someone could love her without fear. She took a deep breath and sat down on the edge of her bed, her hands clasped in her lap. Vance followed her lead, sitting across from her. She knew this moment had to come. There was no more running from the truth. "Vance," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something you need to understand about me, something I've never told anyone." He leaned forward, his eyes focused on her. "You don't have to explain yourself, Kaylee's," he said softly, "but if you're ready, I'm here to listen." Kaylee's looked down at her hands, gathering the courage to speak. "When I was younger, I didn't know what I was capable of. I didn't understand what was happening to the men who came into my life, the ones who tried to love me. I thought it was just a coincidence at first, but then it happened again and again." She paused, trying to find the right words. "Every time I grew close to someone, their minds, they began to break. Slowly at first, then faster. Their strength, their willpower, everything they were, it just disappeared. I couldn't explain it, but it always happened. I thought it was just a curse, something beyond my control, and I started to believe it was my fault." Vance's expression softened as he listened. "So that's what you meant when you said you couldn't love," he said quietly. "You've been carrying this burden for so long you believed there was no way out." Kaylee's nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I've watched so many people, so many men fall apart because of me. I couldn't bear to see that again. I couldn't bear to hurt anyone else." Vance sat in silence for a moment, processing her words. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with conviction. "Kaylee's, I don't know what this curse is or why it happens, but I do know this: I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of whatever power you think you have over me." Kaylee's looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what it's like to live with this." Vance reached out and gently took her hand in his touch warm and reassuring. "No," he said softly. "I don't know, but I'm not leaving, I'm not going anywhere, and I'll help you. We'll figure this out together." For the first time in years, Kaylee's felt a tear slip down her cheek. It was the first time she had allowed herself to cry in front of someone. The first time she had allowed herself to feel vulnerable. And yet, for some strange reason, she didn't feel weak. She felt safe. "I'm so tired, Vance," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Tired of being alone, tired of running from what I feel, but I'm scared of hurting you." He squeezed her hand gently. You won't hurt me, Kayleigh, I promise. I'll stay by your side no matter what. Together we'll find a way. For a long moment they simply sat there, hands intertwined, as the weight of her words hung in the air. Kayleigh could hardly believe it. For the first time in her life, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for her. Hope for a future without the curse that had haunted her for so long. The days after Kayleigh's confession were filled with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in her life, she felt as though she could breathe freely. The walls she had spent years building were slowly starting to crumble, and the man she had once feared to get close to was now the one who made her feel safe. Vance's presence in her life was a steady anchor, a reminder that not all men were destined to fall victim to the curse she carried. As the negotiations between Earth and the Sci-Fi Empire continued, Kayleigh found herself spending more time with Vance. They would walk through the grand halls of the palace, discussing everything from politics to the simple beauty of the stars above. What started as casual conversation soon turned into something more, something that neither of them could deny. Vance had proven to Kayleigh that love wasn't a curse. It wasn't something to fear or avoid. With him, she felt like she could be herself, free from the weight of the curse that had held her captive for so long. But even as their bond deepened, Kayleigh couldn't shake the fear that still lingered in the back of her mind. What if it was all just a dream? What if the curse would still break Vance just as it had broken so many before him? She had to confront this fear. She had to prove that love wasn't a weapon, that it wasn't something that could tear them apart. But she didn't know how. All she knew was that she had to trust him, and that was harder than anything she had ever done before. It wasn't until the day the Empire was threatened that Kayleigh realized just how much she had come to rely on Vance, and how much he had come to rely on her. A dark storm had been brewing for weeks, but it wasn't until the first wave of attacks hit the capital that the full scale of the threat became clear. A rogue faction of the Sci-Fi Empire, loyal to an old royal bloodline that had been cast out long ago, had launched an attack against the palace. Their goal was simple: to destabilize the current regime and claim the throne for themselves. Kayleigh and Vance were in the middle of one of their usual conversations when the first explosion shook the palace. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the sound of alarms filled the air. Kayleigh stood up quickly, her heart pounding. "What's happening?" she asked, panic rising in her chest. Vance grabbed her arm, his face set in a determined expression. "Stay close to me, we need to move." Without another word, they rushed through the palace halls, weaving through the chaos as guards and diplomats scrambled to respond to the attack. Kayleigh had seen war before. She had seen the destruction it could bring, but nothing had prepared her for this. Her world, her carefully constructed life, was falling apart around her. They reached the war room, where the leaders of the Empire were already gathered, trying to coordinate their response. Kayleigh's father, Emperor Thorak, stood at the head of the table, his face grim as he watched the live reports from the palace's security systems. "They're getting closer," he said, his voice low. "We need to act now." "Father," Kayleigh said, stepping forward, "I'll go. I'll lead the defense." Thorak looked at her with a mix of concern and pride. "You don't have to." "I do," Kayleigh interrupted. "If this faction is allowed to succeed, the Empire will fall. I can't let that happen." Thorak hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. But you'll need protection. Vance, I'm trusting you with her safety." Vance nodded firmly, his jaw set. "I won't let anything happen to her." Kayleigh exchanged a brief glance with him, her heart swelling with emotion. She knew that Vance was more than capable of protecting her. But it wasn't just his strength that gave her confidence. It was the bond they had formed, the trust that had been built between them. She could feel it, as if their hearts beat in unison. And for the first time in her life, she knew that love wasn't something to be feared. The battle outside the palace gates raged on as Kayleigh and Vance led a group of elite guards to the front lines. The rogue faction had come prepared, with advanced weapons and a force that outnumbered the Imperial defenders. But Kayleigh had the heart of a warrior, and with Vance by her side, she felt a fire burning inside her, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. They fought together, side by side, cutting through the enemy lines with precision and skill. Kayleigh's blade moved with fluid grace, her every strike a testament to her training and her resolve. Vance was a force of nature, his combat prowess unmatched as he cleared a path for Kayleigh and her guards. The chaos around them seemed to fade into the background. The only thing that mattered was the battle at hand. As the hours passed, the tide began to turn in their favor. The rogue faction was being pushed back, their forces dwindling under the relentless pressure of the Imperial defenders. But just as Kayleys thought they had won, a new threat emerged. A ship, massive and powerful, descended from the sky, hovering just above the palace grounds. It was a warship, unlike anything Kayleys had ever seen. Its sleek design and dark armor reflected the pale light of the moon, making it seem as though it had come from the depths of space itself. The enemy had called for reinforcements. Kayleys' heart sank as the warship's massive guns powered up, targeting the palace with deadly accuracy. The ground shook once more as the first blast struck, sending a wave of destruction through the courtyard. The Imperial guards were thrown off their feet, and Kayleys felt herself being knocked to the ground by the force of the explosion. She scrambled to her feet, her breath coming in short gasps. "We need to stop that ship," she said, her voice filled with urgency. Vance was already on his feet, his face set in a grim expression. "I've got a plan," he said, grabbing her hand. "Follow me." Kayleys hesitated for a moment, but then she realized that this was the only way. They had to act fast before the warship could destroy everything they had fought for. Vance led her toward the control center, a small building located near the palace's main tower. Inside, the commanders were already working frantically to come up with a plan. "Vance," Kayleys said, her voice steady. "What's your plan?" Vance turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "We're going to board that ship and take it down from the inside." Kayleys' heart raced at the thought. It was dangerous, reckless even, but it was the only option they had left. And with Vance by her side, she knew they could succeed. Together, they fought their way through the chaos, moving toward the enemy ship. The battle raged around them, but nothing could stop them now. They had come too far, and there was no turning back. As they neared the ship, Vance looked at Kayleys, his gaze soft but filled with resolve. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. Kayleys took a deep breath, her mind clear and focused. "I'm ready," she replied. "Let's end this." With that, they boarded the warship, cutting their way through the enemy forces with a fierce determination. Inside the ship, they encountered heavy resistance, but their combined strength was unstoppable. They fought through hallways and corridors, finally reaching the control room where the enemy commander was waiting. The final confrontation was fierce. The commander was a skilled fighter, but he was no match for Kayleys and Vance. Together, they brought him to his knees, securing the control room and disabling the warship's weapons. The battle was over. As the ship began to lose altitude, crashing into the ground below, Kayleys and Vance stood together, their hearts racing from the adrenaline of the fight. The battle had been won, but the real victory was the bond they had forged. Kayleys turned to Vance, her heart swelling with emotion. "We did it," she whispered. Vance smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "Together," he said, "always together." For the first time in her life, Kayleys knew that she had found something worth fighting for, something that could never be broken by a curse. She had found love, not just in the heart of a man, but in the strength they shared. And in that moment, she realized that the curse was not a part of her. It was a story, a myth, a weight she had carried for too long. Love was not something that destroyed, it was something that healed. Kayleys and Vance stood together, watching as the sun began to rise over the horizon. The battle was over and the Empire was safe. But more than that, Kayleys had found something she had never thought possible: a future. A future with Vance, a future where love was no longer a curse but a gift.